Hi everyone. I think we still have 2 minutes before the session officially begins. So we'll just wait it out for more people who are here for the storyboarding session. I am super excited that I'm here with you all today, and I'm hoping that you all have your pens and your papers and notepads ready because we are going to need a lot of notes. A big thank you to everyone who has already joined and people have already started commenting in the chat box. I'm super happy that you are here. Please do like the video because we do want to do more of these interactions going ahead as a team. And yes, we have our community team present with us. So if you need any sort of help, assistance with queries, questions, we'll take them in the end. So you can jot all your questions down at the end of the session in the chat box, and we'll try to take as many questions as time permits. And yes, let's wait for another couple of minutes before we get started with our session. All right, I think it's 10 p.m. IST now. And what we are going to do is we are going to start the session. We are not going to wait for other people to join. I can see there are 16 people here already, and we have a fairly long session planned for the writers here. So we are going to get down to the subject matter. And I hope I can see more and more people on the stream as we begin our journey of storyboarding. Now, again, the chat is open for you all. Feel free to put all your questions here, and we'll try and take them at the end. I must begin by telling you that this is the first of its kind YouTube live session that the team has curated and planned for you all. So, in case there are any misses from our end, we are incredibly sorry. But we'll try our best to put our best, like the best things that we've curated for you out there. And yes, let's begin. So, I am Ahindrila, and I am one of the senior editors who work on the growth team. And we deal with a lot of writers, new writers, and their stories on a daily basis. So, the team and the community team decided that we will present something that is like a little bit of an industry secret, like a trade secret for us, where we tell writers how to do storyboarding. Now, this is what you should know if you are writing, especially long form audio fiction from scratch, right? So let's get started. Why does storyboarding matter? Now, there are four primary reasons why storyboarding matters. Because it helps us scale the challenge of long form audio, right? Because you're writing for hundreds and thousands of chapter, and it is important to ensure that there is a system in place and you are not just randomly writing. Because the second problem can arise out of randomly writing, which is a writer burnout, something that a lot of our writers have constantly, time and again, complained about. And the third thing, therefore, that storyboarding gives you is strategic control, which means that it helps you with a method to the madness, if you can call it that, of writing. So it gives you that kind of clarity and control to ensure that this is your story and this is how you are going to continue and keep writing it for hundreds and hundreds of chapters, right? And at the end of the day, it is not just writing that matters. It is also something that must be structured, right? So it is also going to help your editors, if you have personalized editors or your editors at Pocket FM, to sort of ensure that when they are sort of analyzing your story, they see that there is a structure to your story and they can scale the story thereafter. So it is important that your story has a system, and this that is what we are going to talk about in this session, right? The next thing that we talk about, and we here jump directly into the idea of storyboarding, right? The part one of storyboarding is laying the foundation, which by which we mean that how do we conceptualize the idea of a storyboard. We are going to do detailed storyboarding, but let me begin by telling you that we are going to make it a very macro approach, and then we are going to narrow it down slowly and gradually and show you how to go from laying the base of your story to planning out an entire chapter. You just have to be patient with us as we walk you through the slides, right? So let's start with part one, which is laying the foundation. Now, before you even write a single word, it is important that you know what the show is going to be about, right? Because you cannot just one day randomly open your desktop or your laptop and think that you're going to write a story. You must know in your heart of hearts and your brain of brains that this is what you're going to write about. So, these foundational elements are going to guide you in the creative decision that is your story, and it's also going to help you keep your narrative focused through hundreds and hundreds of chapters that you are going to eventually add to your story, right? So if you can call it a constitution, you can think of the storyboard as like a constitution for the story that you are therefore going to write, right? It's like a bible that you should keep very very close to yourself or any religious text for that matter. So now, when we are laying the foundation, there are four very important pillars of this foundation. One is the show title. Another one is the genre of the or the subgenre. The third thing that's very very important, and a lot of writers tend to miss out on it, is the target emotion that we want to sort of express through our story. And the fourth and the most important pillar of this foundation is the core promise. Now, what is the title? It is obviously the name of your story. While it is important that you have a name right at the get go, know that you need to keep your option flexible so that your title can keep changing basis the story that you're building, something that is more like that can engage your listeners or your readers far more, right? So that is how we sort of like little bit tinker around with the title. But in general, when you are laying the foundation, you must have a show title. Then we go into the genre and the subgenre. Think of a specific genre and not just romance. It has to be something that is very, very specific, like second chance romance, like contract marriage, like cultivation, if it's fantasy, right? So think out your genre in like great depth. Is it a revenge thriller or is it a revenge drama? So these questions need to be outlined and sort of answered right at the start. Now, the next thing is the target emotion. What is it that we are trying to convey through our story, right? Are we trying to convey fear? Are we trying to convey longing? Is it revenge? Is it power fantasy? Or is it just romantic tension because we are trying to write a good, hearty romance? So in these cases, the target emotion that you want to sort of depict in your story becomes something that you need to decide right at the get-go. And finally, the most important part of it is the core promise, which means your story's contract with listeners. Now, what this means is a little bit tricky, so we'll go down into the depths of it. Your story's core premise is almost like what is, say, a one liner for the entire narrative arc that your story promises to tell, right? You can condense it into, say, 1 to 3 lines, and it needs to tell the listeners what journey they are embarking on and what emotional territory they are going to explore. If you cannot distill your story into this format, we personally, the editors, think that you are not ready to start writing it, which is when you again go back to the foundations. You again think about your genre, subgenre, you think about your title and the emotion that you are targeting, and you come back to the core promise again, because the story must have a distinguishable protagonist or a main lead. It can be a male or a female lead or any gender of your choice. And it must be set in a certain place, and there must be a clear conflict, right? So, in our discussion of the storyboarding template itself and everything that we are going to discuss here on, we are going to take example of a very, very famous, popular Netflix show. It's called Stranger Things. So, what happens in Stranger Things, and how can we think of the foundation of the Stranger Things show? The show title is Stranger Things, like you know. The genre and the subgenre, you see here how the genre is science fiction. So, it's very clear about what it's trying to target. The subgenre can be multiple. So, it is small town mystery, government conspiracy, coming of age thriller. It can be any, right? And you can have multiple subgenres as long as they are layered very nicely, and they sort of come together to form the bigger genre, which is, say, science fiction here in your narrative. Now, what is the target emotion? The target emotion that this particular show sort of brings to us is primarily fear, and there are other feelings of longing and then growing up and the protective love of parents towards their children, right? So all these things sort of come together, and each season has a particular kind of target emotion that it's going for, but these are the overarching emotions that there is. Now, what is the core promise of this show? The core promise of this show is that when a small town boy vanishes, his group of friends uncover a secret government experiment and a terrifying parallel dimension, proving that friendship may or may not be the only thing strong enough to fight the unknown. Now, while this is a very big line, you can always choose to have a couple of more lines. This particularly is a personal preference where I prefer like a one-line elevator pitch. But in this particular core promise, you will see a lot of factors that I just talked about are pointed out. For example, a small town boy vanishes. So we know that the setting is a small town. His group of friends uncover a secret government experiment. So there is an element of mystery in it, and there's a very high power that is already present as as an antagonist force. We can see it right from the premise, and there is a terrifying parallel dimension. Now there is not just a human antagonist here. There may also possibly be the fear of the unknown, right, which adds a completely different dimension to the story, and it sort of hooks you immediately. So and after that we have the emotional hook that comes in, which says that it is important that this particular story is also proving that friendship may or may not be the only thing that is strong enough to fight the unknown, which means that friendship is at the crux of the entire show, and the many feelings around friendship, and it may or may not be. So we are not really giving out whether or not it successfully sort of fights the unknown, right? And that is a very, very good core promise, because it is like a one line pitch. It is going to immediately sort of hook you to the idea of this show. Now, coming to now, that was part one. Now, something that becomes very, very important to understand is that your story is hereafter going to have a couple of engines, right? One is what we popularly call the external engine, and the other we popularly call the internal engine. The external engine is what drives the plot of the story, and the internal engine, what drives the character of the story. Now, if you have a pen and a paper or a notepad, or you are taking digital notes, I would urge you to write this down, because this is something that is very, very central to how you then go about and create your plot related conflict and your character related conflict in a way that the events sort of mishmash with one another, and they form one seamless, very interesting long form story, right? So these forces, both these engines, they sort of need to work together hand in hand. Now let's discuss a little more about the external engine and the internal engine to give you a better idea. We'll also use Stranger Things as an example. So the external engine refers to the plot conflicts. What kind of conflict exists and repeats in your plot? About the repetition of plot, we'll come to it. We'll discuss it in further details. But these are some of the patterns that you can choose to drive your story forward. For example, you can choose secrets, you can choose power struggle, you can choose mystery, a forbidden relationship, even a contract marriage, or betrayal, or social and family pressure, because these are external forces that a character faces, and that is it's a particular event or a particular act that sort of then drives the story forward towards its goal. So it's one point where you can begin the story from. What is an internal engine? An internal engine generally refers to the character conflicts, what kind of conflicts sort of exists within your protagonist. Now, something that we have popularly seen with long form fiction is that while a lot of writers are very skilled at writing the external engine, their internal engines are sort of stalled when it comes to their main characters. And we have been urging all our writers to write more and more layered protagonists, because the more layers, the more human layers and conflicts your protagonist is going to face within themselves, the more they are going to be relatable for your readers and your listeners, right? So the emotional landscape should sort of give a certain sense of depth to the plot conflict. Like, for example, these are some of the things that your protagonist can face. They can face fear, they can face desire, guilt, ambition, trauma, right? For all these things, therefore, it becomes important that you tie it in with the external engine. Now, to give you an example, in Stranger Things, how does the external engine evolve, right? The external, in the core question here, for at least for Stranger Things season 1, is what is being hidden and who controls the truth. And these things sort of get answered and replaced with bigger and better and more open ended questions as one season progresses to another season to another season, right? So the external engine sort of is queued up as first disappearance, and then there's a cover up, then there's a predator that's revealed, there's an institutional war, and then there's a rescue versus consequence that comes into play, right? So this is how you are supposed to lay out your external engine to sort of know that your plot is moving from, say, betrayal to realization to sadness to anger to revenge. That is an entire trajectory of how a revenge plot can play out. So now coming to the internal engine distribution, especially in terms of Netflix's Stranger Things, here we can consider 4 to 5 characters. For example, the character of Joyce, who is Will's mother, is a character that is defined by the fear that she is constantly feeling. It's maternal terror that sort of drives her to desperately search for her younger son, and she's not able to accept the loss. 11, who is one of the female leads of the show, she comes from a place where she's struggling with horrific childhood, having spent that in a lab, being like one of the subjects of the experiment. So her core emotion can be trauma, right? For example, Hopper is facing a lot of guilt because of the loss of his own daughter that's haunting him from his past. And then there's Nancy, Jonathan, Steve. These are characters that are engineered by their desire, by their romantic tension, and by their need to sort of leave Hawkins. So these are some of the characters, and this is how the internal engine sort of distributes these characters these sort of primary emotions that these characters can feel over a multitude of characters, because this is a like a broad show that has multiple seasons. If you have one show that you are writing, one story that you are writing, and you are not yet able to sort of reach that level, what you can obviously do is you can obviously distribute these characters evenly in your protagonists with time, or you can give your protagonist sort of one particular internal engine, which is, say, ambition, and that can eventually metamorphose into guilt, or that can eventually then become fear as the plot progresses. Quickly moving to part two, which is how do we visualize the big picture. So now, once we have laid the foundation, we know we have four things in the foundation. We have the internal engine, external engine, and now we come to how we visualize the big picture, which is, we don't go ahead and write the 200 chapters. Obviously, that's completely like no. So what we do is we divide them into clear arcs that then give our narrative structure, and it kind of prevents any sort of creative drift. So think of these arcs as seasons within your show, each with its own identity, purpose, and payoff. Think of it almost like dividing an entire story up, or an entire show up into multiple seasons. That would be the closest that comes to this, right? So here is a very specific example of a four arc structure that you can see. The first being a hook and setup, the second being the escalation, the third being complications, and the fourth being payoff. Now, this is generally the typical structure that is followed by all authors when they are writing long form fiction, because the first arc that they write is a hook and setup, because they need to introduce their characters, they need to introduce the conflict, they need to sort of draw their listeners in and give a little bit of context of the world that these characters belong to. If you notice, you will see that escalation and complications, they're generally the broader sort of arcs, because that's where your story is really sort of developing its muscle strength. It's gaining volume, and it's gaining listeners retention and interest, so that they can stick on to your story for longer. Now, the first, we'll quickly discuss the four arcs that we have sort of talked about. The first arc is about the hook and the setup. So, you establish your world and your core conflict. And anything that is normal can feel abnormal in this particular stage. So, again, you can see on your screen, we've put examples with respect to Stranger Things. So how Hawkins is introduced as like a safe and a boring town, and then suddenly Will disappears, and there are these random physical cues that Joyce can hear through the lights, right? So this arc is a promise that there's a journey that's lying ahead, and it immediately sort of gets your listeners or your viewers to sort of sit down with like popcorn and coke on their couch, and like just enjoy what is going to happen next. The second arc is obviously escalation, and this is standard for all shows or all stories that you are writing. The purpose of this particular second arc is to raise the stakes, right? You can put relationships under pressure, you can introduce secondary characters, you can layer out your narrative in a way that it feels like there is one core promise that the story is driving towards, but this particular arc sort of gives your conflicts volume. There may be micro conflicts that are involved. We put all of them in this arc in a layered way. For arc 3, we have something that we call it complications. Now, what does it mean? It means that there has been a hook, there has been a setup of your show. After that, we have sort of escalated the conflict, and now after the conflict is escalated and the listeners and your viewers or readers are very intrigued as to what is going to happen next, you introduce a twist that can cost the protagonist a great moral, like it can be something that is morally ambiguous, it can be like a real intriguing plot twist, it can be an absolutely new information that comes in. So this is a particular point in your storyline where your heroes are bound to get compromised, because something that you as writers should know, and we as editors keep telling our writers, is that your heroes must not remain heroes at all times, because then they do not become, then they are not constantly relatable with your readers or your listeners. They need to sort of take a back seat, they need to lose. And this particular arc, the complications arc, is the point in your story where this can happen effectively, right? So particularly for say your Stranger Things, your monsters can get misunderstood as a predator. You realize that there is a government that is exposed, but this government is not defeated, right? So there are still open plot holes, and that is going to be the driving factor into your arc 4, which is the arc of the payoff. It is broadly called the payoff, and this arc is supposed to mandatorily deliver on the promise that is made in arc 1. Now, even if we for a second step away from our Stranger Things reference, we can think about, say, a romance drama where we promised right at the start in arc 1 that our female lead is going to find love. And this female lead may have gone through hundreds and hundreds of chapters of trials and tribulations, with her, say, accidental pregnancy, and then twins, and maybe some corporate rival, right? So all of that. But in arc 4, when you are finally tying the story up, you need to ensure that you deliver on the promise that you made in arc 1, which is that your protagonist finds love. Now, there will be some consequences and some resolutions that are going to happen, that's going to change around the world that these protagonists are in, but that is completely fine. And your listeners or your readers have come so far because they want something like that to happen. So these are your 4 arcs. Now, something that is important is that you don't think of the ending of a story as the end of an entire story, because in long form fiction, once you have closed one chapter, the epilogue is always a setup for the next chapter that can begin, right? So resolution isn't about answering every question, it's about answering what specifically happens with in terms of Stranger Things this season's questions, or in terms of your story, whatever happens in the first 200 chapters, your epilogue should be sort of like a gateway to the next set of 200 chapters that you are going to write, right? So this is how you frame the overall arc of your story. So there are 4 arcs and an epilogue that is sort of the key to the next 4 arcs of the story that you write. Now let's move to part 3, which is we start by plotting our 10 to 15 chapters. Every arc is like it's going to be big enough, but we cannot plot again 100 200 chapters at one go. You will get overwhelmed, you will feel like this is stripping you of your creativity, and that is not what storyboards are meant for. They're meant to sort of ensure that you can write as effortlessly as possible. So instead of plotting all 200 chapters and making yourself feel like some maverick, you sit down with your pen and paper and you just plot the first 10 to 15 chapters. That also allows you to sort of go back and improvise, and you can change around a few things when you're moving to the 16th chapter, right? So that can happen. Now, this is generally the mini run framework. We call it a mini run when we are taking a look at, say, the first 10 to 15 chapters. When we are plotting them, we have one goal, which is what are our characters trying to achieve in this mini arc. So there will be one particular goal. Your character wants to get rid of a particular character, or get revenge on a particular character, or say it's maybe about showing off their wealth to another character so that they don't get humiliated anymore. That is a mini arc, okay? That's a mini goal that this character is has in its head. And then the character faces a specific barrier or an obstacle. So after goal comes obstacle, and then there has to be some twist. For example, maybe Jason is a character who is trying to run after a certain sum of money, and only when he reaches that place, sorry, does he realize that, oh, the money is not there at all. The money is actually maybe going to come to him in the form of a contract marriage with another person, right? So there has to be some unexpected complication, because that is where the drama sort of peaks, and your listeners and your readers are seated because they want to know how your character is now going to achieve the goal that they sent out to achieve in this mini arc, right? And at the end, we need to sort of come to a mini conclusion, which is there a partial payoff, which means that maybe this Jason example that I just gave, right? Is Jason now going to get into the contract marriage just because of the money? And if he is going to do that, how is his life going to change thereafter, right? There must be some consequence to this particular act. So this is how you plan out your mini runs. Always remember, first is goal, second is obstacle, third is twist, and then the fourth is the partial payoff. Now, we have a lot of shows on Pocket FM, and I would recommend highly that you listen to some of the first 10 to 15 chapters, which are mostly free on our app. So you can listen to them. For fantasy, we recommend My Vampire System, Strongest Warlock. We recommend Saving Nora when it comes to, say, a good, hearty romance. For romantasy, we recommend The Alpha's Bride. These are shows that you can listen to on our app. The only reason why I suggest this is because it is not very easy to do your mini run plotting, and you may want to sort of look at some of the best examples that are currently present on our platform to understand how some of the top authors who we are working with every day have done it so effortlessly, and sometimes not even effortlessly, sometimes we have helped them do it, right? So these are some of the shows that you can go back and listen to on the app, and take lessons from them. Yes. Now, moving to part four, which is our penultimate sort of part of this entire storyboarding idea, which is chapter level storyboarding, and is one of the possibly more difficult portions, and easy if you know how to do it. So, for the chapter level storyboarding, something that at least you have right now is you have the broad overarching structure, and then you sort of have the mini arcs planned out for every 10 to 15 chapters, which means that now all you need to do is you need to get down to the individual chapters and plot a micro story for each, right, that contributes to the larger narrative of the 10 to 15 chapters. So this is where you sort of get to design when Jason gets wealth, when Jason has enough intel to go to this location, how he's going to this location, how is he getting exposed to this twist, etc., right? So all these things you get to plan out in further details as you enter the part 4 of your storyboarding. You can freely copy the template that's going to come up in the next slide, because that is going to help you maintain the structural discipline. This is a 5 column template, right? We the for starters, it's always going to have a POV, because the point of view is what sort of leads your readers or your listeners into a particular show. A third person point of view gives an overarching view. The female lead or the male lead's point of view is going to just give you their side of the story, right? And the lens via which they are sort of experiencing the conflict, and the entire revelation is happening to them, right? So point of view is number one. Number two is the conflict that is taking place. Number three is the turn or the reveal that is taking place, and the cliffhanger. Cliffhanger always refers to the unanswered questions. And all this you are going to plan out over your individual chapter. So the most important column of this 5 column template is your chapter number. You need to track your position in the arc with the help of these chapter numbers. So for example, my first 5 chapters that I write are going to be from a third person point of view. We on Pocket generally encourage that you use the third person point of view consistently across all chapters. You don't switch from one POV to another. In case you're switching from one POV to another, we recommend you do it over large chunks of chapter. Like, say you write the first maybe 100 or 50 or 200 chapters from one person's POV, and then there's a flip, and the story continues without going back to the same thing that happened from just from another POV. Anyway, that aside, it's important that you sort of put down your POV, and now you start jotting down your conflict, the reveal, everything that we have talked about, right? We just talked about the four things in the mini arc. You just need to do that, but now with a little more precision, where you do your chapter numbers for this. Okay, so I sincerely hope you've taken like a quick look at this and maybe also jotted this down, because this is very, very important when it comes to writing down your individual chapters. Now, moving to how you can sort of make this table by yourself on your notepads or on your digital exercise books, and you can plan this out. So, here we have chapter one, where the point of view is third person, and there's a conflict, which is, say, a heated argument with the male lead about the female lead's independence. And there is a certain turn that happens in the chapter itself, where you get a glimpse of how the sort of protectiveness of the male lead is stemming from some past trauma. And at the end of the chapter, you can almost feel that you want to sort of broach the idea that there is going to be a mysterious something that happens, right? So that's very, very important. Now, for the next chapter, you can again plot it in third person, whoever is coming, what is getting overheard, what is the turn, etc., and then another cliffhanger. This is how you jot down your story from chapter to chapter. And when you are doing it in the form of this particular like templatized graph sort of on your notepads, sorry for the hiccup there, you can always do it, and then you can keep improvising, you can keep going back and sort of figuring out how to change and twist it around so that it sort of fits the best version of the story that is present in your own head. Now, here are some non-negotiable chapter rules. Again, very, very important. It's coming directly from the core editorial group and team that we have on Pocket. And these are the three elements that if you are missing out on, you are more or less writing a filler chapter. And if you are writing more than one filler chapter after every 15 or 16 chapters, then your story may not be in a great place. It may need like a lot of work, and it always risks that listeners are going to fall off. Right. So now what we are going to do is we are going to talk about these three non-negotiable chapter rules. One is the main conflict. Now, if there are multiple conflicts that are taking place simultaneously, your listeners are going to sort of get distracted, which you don't want, which is why you want to choose the most important tension, and then you sort of commit to it, right? After that, you have one emotional or plot shift. So, for example, something must change by the chapter's end. It can be a relationship dynamic, a power balance, it can be a big revelation, but there has to be something that happens that sort of is like a chink in the matrix of the world that you have created, and contributes to your plot and the emotional arc and or the emotional arc of your characters, right? The third thing that's very important to keep in mind is that there has to be an unanswered question. You cannot and you should not mandatorily always end your story with with one person going to bed and next morning the person is waking up, which happens in the next chapter. Or you cannot draw your plot on conflict to a conclusion by the end of the chapter. We always recommend, especially in long form audio fiction, that you to hook your listeners and to ensure that your listeners are binging on your show, you leave the chapter mid conflict, and then Your cliffhanger can be subtle from time to time. It's not always possible to have like a great cliffhanger, but you must make sure that you place a cliffhanger nonetheless, so that it creates a sort of momentum, right? Now moving on to the last portion of this storyboarding process, which is honestly just sanity checking. It is something that we call how to avoid repeats and escalation checks. So one of the greatest dangers that we have realized authors tend to fall into the trap of is repetition. And as you write 100 chapters, 200 chapters, and then there are people who write 500, 700 chapters. For them, unfortunately, you can only think about so much when it comes to a certain male lead or a certain female lead, right? So in some of these cases, what you need to do is you need to immediately raise the stake. And that can only happen when you are taking time off at least once a week to sit down and audit your show, audit the upcoming arc, the arc that you have just written, and getting a sense of whether or not this particular arc that you have just written this week is going to follow the arc that is coming next week hand in glove, right? So you need to, and you must, as a matter of principle, as a writer who is interested in writing long form fiction, any kind of fiction, um, that you have a weekly audit day just to yourself where you sit down and edit your own work. Now, this is how your weekly audit questions must look like. Primarily, these are some of the weekly audit questions that we encourage all our writers to sort of take a look at, which is, are your characters fighting about the same issue again and again? Because if they are, it means that no conflict is getting resolved, which is directly something that negates the ground rules that we set out in the mini arc. So if our conflicts are not getting resolved and they are fighting about the same issue again and again, then that is a problem. We need to escalate and take it to a new dimension, give it a new angle, raise the stakes, anything that can give it like a fresh touch. After that, we come to our reveals happening too quickly, which means, are you maybe not building on your conflict enough? Is there conflict, but that conflict is getting resolved so easily, and possibly sometimes with the help of something that we call the deus ex machina, which is this particular for sort of literary thing that where one random person or one random figure or object is coming to the rescue of the protagonist, and that immediately sort of makes you lose tension, in like interest in the tension that the plot had built, right? So you need to understand that mystery requires effort, and you need to keep your listeners invested, so reveals should not happen too quickly. Now the third thing is our tensions, our time jumps, removing tension. Something that we generally recommend our listeners, our authors, to not do is do a time jump. That is a grave mistake. The moment you move forward 3 to 5 years into your story, into the narrative, your listeners sort of, number one, lose that momentum, and they are also, you are losing that scope where they could have been more interested in your story, right? So you're losing that entire momentum and sort of letting your listeners take a break, which is what you should avoid. So ideally, when you're writing long form fiction, make it seem like it's happening seamlessly one after the other, and you don't leap past interesting conflicts. Now this is the escalation mandate again. If your audit reveals that your show or your story itself have been stagnated, you must escalate. This is what I've been talking about for the last 2 3 minutes. Escalation is very, very, very important, and you can escalate in either of these four ways, right? One can be an emotional risk, one can be social consequences, one can be a moral dilemma, and the last one can be a power imbalance. All of these can topple the sort of hierarchy or the position in which the male lead or the female lead is currently positioned at, and that is going to immediately add like a new level of threat or consequence or even interest for your listeners or readers to sort of get hooked onto. Now, whenever you recognize, whenever you are not able to, maybe you have been auditing your show for a while, right? But you are not able to recognize what exactly narrative stagnation means. Here are four things that are going to help you realize and sort of figure out what they are. So, again, if you have a digital notepad or a pen and a paper, please go ahead and write these down, because they are very important whenever you are doing a self edit of your chapters, of your mini arcs, any of these. So one is circular arguments, where, like I mentioned already, the characters are constantly rehashing the same disagreement, right? The next thing is a convenient solution, which means problems are happening but there is no meaningful sort of struggle or cost. These problems are getting solved very very easily, and perhaps too easily for your listeners to remain interested in. There is a repetitive pattern, not just in the argument or in the conflict, but repetitive pattern in also how after every betrayal there is a sort of realization, then there is anger, then there is revenge. And if this keeps happening for 500 chapters, why should a listener keep listening to your story, right? So this is something that we avoid. And the fourth thing, one of the again most important things, is a static relationship. If this is a romance drama and your characters have not evolved beyond their coldness, the male lead's coldness and the female lead's helplessness, over 300 chapters, your show is in danger, because your male and female leads relationship is then static, and listeners want change, they want to see growth in characters especially. So that is a strict no no. Now, this is our final pre writing checklist. Once you have made all your mini arcs and foundation and everything, you can sort of quickly take a look at these four pointers that we have for you and jot them down right away, so that next time you are starting to write something new, you can always take a look at these. You can always think about these four pointers and feel confident, so that you can also start writing, right? The first thing is, can you summarize any 20 chapters in 2 lines? The same thing that we talked about as the foundation base. Do you have an elevator pitch for the first 20, or for the first 20 or any 20 chapters that you write? Does the midpoint change everything? Say around you've written now 100 chapters, or even for a mini arc, say you've written 10 chapters. After that, is there a major revelation or some reversal that is going to reframe or make the authors go, oh my god, what just happened, right? There must be that sort of element to your midpoint in the story, in any sort of arc. Is that present in your story? The third thing is, are characters driving the story, or are they just reacting to it? Know for a fact that listeners character, like, they particularly dislike characters who are reactive. They want more and more characters who are who are driving the story forward, who are driving the plot forward with their own agency. And they don't want protagonists who are just reactive. Like, a lot of female protagonists of romantasy shows, of romance shows, are protagonists who are just like whiling their time away because they are crying or cribbing, and feeling sorry or guilty or sad, right? No, we want characters who really drive the story forward. And does every arc promise a new experience? It cannot be that all the 15 arcs that you have planned for your show are about like a certain love triangle, right? Every arc has to be distinguishably different. One can be about a contract marriage, another can be about growing feelings, another one can be about realizing that they have feelings, another can be about a love triangle, it can be about say an accidental pregnancy, that can be about then like guilt. So all these things can come in, but every arc has to promise something new. These are your four most essential verification pointers before you start writing, and after you have conceived your entire story from base up, right? So now I think this is all that you need to know when it comes to storyboarding. This is how you build your story ground up. And if you can tick every box of this checklist, then you are sorted, you are good to go. You have a solid foundation, you have a core premise, and you know which direction the story is taking, right? So, quickly summing up, we ensure that we have a consistent writing schedule, we do flexible planning, we do weekly audits, and we do mini arc focus. if you can sustain a routine like this, a writing routine for yourself, and you can adapt this templatized process and then figure out what suits you better, what you like doing more, in that case I think you are out there. You can obviously go ahead and write. There are some common pitfalls, but these I believe are things that you will learn as you start writing. So we'll quickly move on to the Q&A, and we'll end this presentation, move on to the Q&A and take some of the questions. I can see that a lot of you have actually written down a lot of questions. If you have any questions, feel free. We have roughly some 7 to 8 minutes, so we should be able to take some questions here. I don't see any questions yet, so if you have any questions, feel free to drop them. Um, Okay, I see one. It says, how can I efficiently manage participating in multiple writing contests without sacrificing quality or leaning too heavily on AI? The easier response here is actually storyboard. Whenever you see that a contest has come up and you think you have an idea and you want to capitalize on that idea, immediately get to storyboarding. The better you are at storyboarding, the more efficient you will be at handling multiple storyboards at the same time. A lot of long form fiction authors tend to do that. They can juggle these stories over long periods of time. Again, leaning heavily on AI is something that's completely up to you. I don't, or the editorial team does not recommend it. Please go ahead and use AI if you need to. It can always assist you, but leaning too heavily may actually sacrifice the quality, which I think you already know here, which is why it's important that you do storyboarding to sort of help you efficiently manage this multiple writing thing if you want to do for multiple contests that we have running on the platform right now. I hope that answers your question though. How can you get different pictures to your story? You cannot get different pictures to your story, particularly on the platform if you're talking about Pocket FM. However, know that. I mean, if you are talking about a different platform, then I will not be aware of it, unfortunately. If you are talking about just Pocket FM, then we are talking about shows that get converted into audio series. So there will not be any video representation. If you are talking about pictures to get your storyboarding correct, then I would say go ahead and use Pinterest. Go ahead and use AI. It can also help you create a mood board for your story if you're writing fantasy, right? Next question is, how many hours do you think we should have storyboard for before we start writing? Okay, roughly you should have the next 10 to 15 chapters always storyboarded before, when you are writing the 10 to 15 chapters. So if I am writing chapter 15 today, I will mandatorily have storyboarded till chapter 30, right? That is how much buffer you should generally have in case you feel like a writer writing burnout, or say your editors are rushing you to write and publish a chapter, but you don't feel like putting your brains to it. You have an idea that is jotted down, so the 15 chapters can act as a fail safe, right? So that is something that you can do. However, I would recommend that you can feel free to sort of tinker around and figure out what's your best fail safe looking like. It can be 10 chapters, it can be 15 chapters. 10 chapters would roughly correspond to, I would say, an hour, a little more than an hour, around 2 hours. So maybe an hour or extra of an hour or so of content. Yeah. Cool. I'm glad that clarifies a lot of stuff. Um, any other questions? Anyone? I think in case there are no questions, we are going to close this live now. Thank you so very much for everybody who stuck around and heard me out patiently. Um, do you like working for Pocket? I do a lot. I've been here for a long, long time now. And I am looking forward to working with a lot of authors who have been on this stream. In case you feel interested and motivated to write, I would encourage you to write on Pocket, and may you have the best time writing your own story and giving it a voice. Best of luck with your writing, guys. Thank you so very much for sticking around again. I'm glad we chose to do this. A big thank you to the community team that helped us sort of bring this to life. I hope that we will be able to do a lot more of these sessions, a lot more detailed sessions on going ahead and storyboarding in particular, and we can discuss other stuff. Like, I can see somebody has written about writing sequels to shows. We can come up and discuss all these in more YouTube lives. Again, thank you so very much, and I hope you have a good time today. Okay, thank you. Good night.